Welcome everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. I think most everybody's here. As I said, I'm very happy you all could join us. My name is Mara Grossman. This is the March meeting of the New River Valley chapter of the Virginia Master Naturalists. So welcome to all of our current members, new members, trainees, members of the public. Very happy to have all of you join us. We have a great speaker lined up tonight. And so I think the way we'll do this meeting tonight is we're going to have our speaker first, and then after our speaker has finished, then we will do some club chapter updates, talk about news and anything else. So, but the speaker will go first, and Barb has agreed to introduce our speaker. So, Barb,
okay,
yeah.
Chelsea Blount, who works with she is actually the restoration director at the New River Conservancy. She's titled her talk, "The Dirt on Sedimentation." Is that right? I like it. The United States Environmental Protection Agency lists sediment, dirt, as the most common pollutant in our rivers. And Chelsea will discuss how dirt and other non-point source pollution degrades water quality, what landowners can do to protect their streams, and how the New River Conservancy's River Builder program is here to help dirt keep in its place. So Chelsea, thanks for being here. It's all yours.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited. I was not expecting more than 35 people. I think the last virtual presentation I did was to a very enthusiastic 12. So I'm really glad to see you all. Thanks again for having me. And I feel like every time I present to groups like this, I feel like I'm preaching to the most educated choir. So I really look forward to the Q&A. But I like to preface by saying I'm going to move through stuff really quickly, but please speak out. I love conversation. I think when questions come up organically, that's when I learn the most. I think that's when you all can learn the most. So freely, please just ask, hey, stop, let's talk. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can jump right in. Please don't be intimidated by the number of slides, a lot of photos, but I will move this out of the way. Okay. All right, is that working well for everybody? Or is it loading?
Seems like it's loading.
Okay, wonderful. It's gonna be slow. So in the meantime, I guess I'll just introduce myself. Barbara, thank you so much for doing my introduction. I do like a little bit of corn in my presentation, so I appreciate y'all for bearing with me there. I have worked for New River Conservancy for 8 years now. I started as a grunt planting the banks myself, and I've worked my way up to actually being program director. So I run all of our restoration programs, all of our project management for those projects, river cleanups, and I just kind of help a little bit everywhere as needed, as you do. So I'm really, well, right now I'm wondering why it's not loading. Let me stop my share 1 second. Maybe it's struggling. I apologize, you guys. This is not usually how that goes. All right, let's try this again. Thinking about it. Anybody have questions so far? Okay, there we go. Can I get a thumbs up? Let's see, right now, Mara, I can see you. Okay, thank you. So like I said, the title of my presentation is "The Dirt on Sedimentation." Thank you, Barbara, again for starting me off with my favorite fact, which is that the #1 pollutant in all of our waterways is dirt. Surprise, surprise, because dirt can have a lot of negative effects. So we'll jump right in. I'd like to start by just asking everybody why they're here today. And because I'm preaching to the choir, I can kind of understand why most of you are here. But do some of you guys have streams on your property that you're concerned about? Do we have educators? Or do you all just like to attend workshops? You know, if you want to drop in the chat your answer to that question, I just like to see, but I can kind of guess tonight why everybody is interested. I'll keep on rolling here. So I like to start off on a kindergarten level. I've found over the years that people resonate or kindergarten level information resonates with people because it's fun. So I always start from the 30,000 foot view. What is a watershed? And I like to tell people to cup their hands together like this and imagine that this is your watershed. This is your local watershed. This is how I tell kids to do this. If you can imagine that the fingertips are your mountains and the edges of your thumbs are the mountain ridges, anything that falls in this watershed of your hands is going to drain to the same place, that little river that flows right down between your palms. And anything that falls outside of it is another watershed. So that's a really simple way that I kind of describe that for folks. Just for reference, this is where the New River watershed is located in the larger Mississippi watershed. You can see that it's broken down into a lot of little sub-basins. So you can see our little New River section here flows into the Ohio, which then flows into the Mississippi and drains into the Gulf of Mexico, which is really cool. And I also like to start with this quote because this quote means a lot to me. It kind of sums up why New River Conservancy does what we do, why we focus on land protection and restoration is because, as Hal Borland put it, any river is the summation of the whole valley, and think of it as nothing but water is to ignore the greater part. Because a river is really only going to be as healthy as the land that flows through it. So I like to approach every conservation project with that in mind, and that healthy land means healthy rivers. All right, so what is a riparian zone and what makes a healthy stream bank? A riparian just means next to a river, and a healthy riparian stream bank is one that is vegetated because that vegetation is going to filter waterways from anything that's going on the surrounding lands. So that is what makes a healthy stream bank. Benefits of those include things like protection from erosion, because all of those root networks, like you can see underground here, kind of act as like a woven web of roots to hold all that soil together. The vegetation on top of the soil filters pollutants out of stormwater runoff. And as that friction from the vegetation slows surface runoff down, it can reduce flood damage. It also creates wonderful wildlife habitat. It shades the streams to keep them cool. And then it also just improves the aesthetic value of landscapes. I've read several reports and studies that say that home values actually increase if the rivers and streams that are on those properties are vegetated instead of just turf grass, you know. And I love this. I really like to emphasize that a healthy riparian buffer can extend really, really far. And the further and wider a riparian buffer is, the more benefits you're going to gain from that buffer. So if you have a 25-foot buffer, that's going to keep you from losing soil. If you have a 100-foot buffer, that'll start to actually remove pollutants from that surface water runoff. And then if you have a 300-foot buffer, you're really getting the full benefit that a riparian buffer can bring to the table, which is wildlife corridors, migratory bird corridors. You get wonderful habitat, you get shade, you get so much stuff, especially buffering human land use from those streams. So the wider the buffer, the better. And if there's anything you can do for a stream, you should plant something on it. Yay, arrows. Again, so it's just to emphasize that the minimum buffer width is about 25 to 35 feet, which is just going to keep all that soil in place. And then the wider the buffer is, the more benefits you're going to gain from that. And I love this image. So this image is obviously an artist rendition of all the streams and rivers in our country broken up by watershed. The largest of which is the Mississippi River watershed, that giant pink blob in the middle, which we're proudly a headwater stream of. And can you just imagine if every single one of these stream corridors had like a 35-foot vegetated buffer on it? How wonderful that would be for our wildlife. How they could just freely move about the country and about their habitats and safely get from one point to another, and how clean our water would be and our drinking water would be if it was all filtered through buffers. If everything was buffered in the whole country, it would be like Eden. It would be so wonderful. So that's always what we're striving for at New River, is to buffer every stream and every part of our watershed. Whether we'll ever get there or not, that's another story, but we're always gonna shoot for that. So what makes an unhealthy stream bank? And you've all seen it, and a lot of people might not understand what an unhealthy stream bank is. I know that I had that conversation with my own parents when they bought a property that had a stream that was eating away at their yard. I planted a bunch of native varieties on the stream bank, and several years later, they're taller than my dad, and the neighbor's property is actually starting to erode, and he really likes to rub that in their face. So an unhealthy stream bank just means that it's either actively eroding, it has a lack of vegetation, or you've got direct impervious surface input from surrounding maybe parking lots or like this LA River type thing at the bottom of the screen. So any, combination of these factors could mean that a stream is unhealthy or left vulnerable. So what happens when we mow our grass to the edge of a stream? And I hear this all the time with people that move up to the mountains and they love the river and they want to see it. So why would I plant trees on it? I moved here to look at the river. Well, because your property is going to erode. That's the number one thing. When that happens, you get vertical banks. When you get those vertical banks, it means that sediment that is eroding into the river is going to pollute the river and create really muddy bottoms. So all that sediment has to go somewhere, and it's going to settle out into the base of the riverbed. Water temperature increases because you don't have any vegetation shading that creek. That's bad for fish. And then all those excess nutrients from the yards, especially if you keep a very nice lawn, all the fertilizers could run into the water. It's carried by that dirt, and it contributes to things like harmful algal blooms, which can be dangerous to not only humans, but pets and other animals as well. And it can be toxic. So there's a lot that could happen by mowing your grass all the way to the edge of the river. One reason why we advocate for native plants along a riverbank is because if you look at the little red square in the top left corner, that is your typical lawn turf grass. And this graph shows what is above ground and what is below ground. And what is below ground with turf grass is almost nothing. So there's nothing holding that dirt back. There's nothing keeping the bank from being eroded when those floods do eventually come. All of the other varieties are native prairie grasses, and you can see how deep and how fibrous those roots are. And those are the types of things that we want to see along our waterways to keep all of that sediment from eroding. And like Barb mentioned earlier, sediment is bad for the river. The EPA lists sediment as the most common pollutant in all of our waterways. And that is bad because sediment kind of has two major dimensions, the physical reason why it's bad and the chemical reason why it's bad in excess in our waterways. Physically, all of that dirt and that mud gets into our water and makes it look like chocolate milk. And it deposits into our riverbeds and our lake beds and covers up all those holes and all those pretty rocks and boulders where critters find habitat. And the chemical reason why it's bad is because a lot of dirts, especially clays, we're on the East Coast, we have a lot of clay. Clays can absorb a lot of those chemicals from lawn fertilizers, from impervious surface runoff, so things like, oils from cars or parking lots. And when it absorbs all of that and gets washed into our waterways, those chemicals are then, threatening the wildlife that live in our waterways. Here's another photo. I just love collecting photos of chocolate milk rivers. So this was another photo. This is not a very large watershed in the headwaters. One rain came up, it rained for maybe an hour, and that's what we get coming down this tributary into the South Fork of the New River. So yeah, it's not great. I don't like seeing that, but it does happen. The reason why I like to bring this to everybody's attention is because you can't always see what's happening beneath the surface of the water. This is a classic example in the headwaters for those of you that aren't familiar with Boone Mall. It's a very small mall in Boone, North Carolina, but it's locally known as Lake Boone because every time it rains, the parking lot, like in that photo on the bottom, completely floods. And it becomes a lake. It stays that way for at least a day. And then when the water recedes, you're left with like inches of mud on the parking lot. And this drainage, this particular drainage is less than 4 square miles. So that's showing you how much erosion is occurring upstream that is making all of the sediment drain downstream. And then the first chance it gets to flood out of the creek, it goes onto the mall parking lot and all of that gunk settles out. So if you can imagine what this sediment is doing to this parking lot, or if you can see what it's doing to this parking lot, can you imagine what it's doing to our stream beds in much larger scales? Because like, again, this is only like a 4 square mile drainage and it's a very small creek. So we can only imagine what this type of dirt pollution is doing to our like river bottoms. And I always like this little cartoon. It says, the good news is they're not fishing us anymore. Let's hope that doesn't occur in the new. Here's a more local example for you all. This is actually an aerial photo taken at Plater Lake. So again, it's just showing the scale at which sediment can become a problem. For lakes in particular, because you're not getting that natural sediment transport downstream, which does happen and is good when you introduce things like human accelerated erosion with impairments like dams, or not impoundments like dams, you get a lot of sediment settling to the bottom of these lakes and these backed up rivers. And eventually, you know, that will need to be addressed. It could affect the function of the dam, affects habitat at the bottom of these lakes, but I just like to provide a more local example. And then another huge cuddly reason why sedimentation is bad for our rivers is because critters like the hellbender are incredibly vulnerable to sedimentation. These are my favorite critter. They're also known as devil dogs. Snot otters is a good one. Also the lasagna lizard, because of the foldy skin that they have along their bellies on either side. The reason that their skin is so foldy and wrinkly is because they don't have lungs. They actually breathe through their skin. So the more wrinkly their skin is, the more surface area they have to be able to breathe. Well, sediment is bad because not only does it cover up all of their habitat on the bottom of the river, but it also gunks up their skin. And it's kind of like if you stuck your fingers in your nose and tried to breathe. That's exactly what happens for critters like the hellbender, which are very important bioindicator species. They can tell us a lot about what's happening with water quality. So we've talked about the reasons why sediment's bad for the river, but how is sediment bad for us, the landowner? And my favorite argument is, well, you still pay taxes on land that you are losing that you're never going to get back. That's how I convince a lot of people to take action. But I like this example because if you can imagine a river, imagine that the river is the beer glass, the beer is the water, the sides of the glass are the river banks. It's deep, it's nice, and then you take that and you pour it into a cookie sheet. That's what's happening when erosion is allowed to occur for a long, long time. Our rivers widen, so the river banks erode for years and years and years, and they just get wider and wider and wider, and our water gets shallower and shallower and shallower, meaning that it's more vulnerable to temperature increases. So erosion over time leads to a warmer, shallower river. And excess nutrients from all of that sedimentation plus that warm water can lead to things like blue-green algae, like we mentioned earlier. They can be really harmful to us, they can be harmful to wildlife, and that's just not the new river that we want. Because I like to always take what we talk about and put it on a global scale. So this isn't unique to the New River. This is something that all rivers all over the world are faced with, to the point that that warm, algae-laden water leads to things like dead zones in massive parts of the world. This is also a process known as eutrophication. Probably the most popular example that we know of that the New River actually contributes to is the Gulf of Mexico. So the Gulf of Mexico is, typically a major fishing industry kind of area. But because of all of these nutrients and all of this sedimented water that has gone into the Gulf for decades and decades and decades, it's created these really nutrient-rich, really warm waters. And when that algae is allowed to bloom and you get these massive algal blooms, as soon as they begin to degrade, it sucks up all the available oxygen in the water, leading to massive fish kills, otherwise known as dead zones. So this isn't something that's unique, but it's something that you, with a stream in your own backyard, could help contribute to the improvement of, hopefully getting rid of these dead zones and making a small impact, but an impact nonetheless. So we kind of just went over that. What can I do to my stream bank to help the river? Well, for one, you could always call us. New River Conservancy is here to help. We've been around since 1976, and the River Builder program, which is our river restoration and consultation program, has been around since 1998. And we've planted over 105 miles of stream riparian zones since that time. And most recently, we've actually expanded into Virginia. So we have funding available for landowners to plant their banks with native plants in Giles, Montgomery, and I think a really tiny part of Craig County. So you can always call us. And we'll actually come out and restore the buffer for you. We use native cuttings called live stakes. And the big five is what I usually like to say. The big five species we usually plant are Silky dogwood, Silky willow, Ninebark, Elderberry, buttonbush, and many others. But these are the ones that are most often available to us. And these live stakes, when they're allowed to flourish undisturbed, just create enormous, beautiful, mature plants within a few years. So they're really efficient ways of restoring our stream banks. This is exactly how you install a live stake. This is a workshop we did in the headwaters a few years ago on the state park. And if you were out there right now, you would see all these little tiny, like 2-foot bushes, and it's well on its way to being restored. Here are just some examples of the programs or some of the sites that we've offered planting to sites in our program in the past. This was in Ashe County. As you can see, the buffer was pretty well sloped. The river could rise and recede without taking a lot of dirt with it. It just didn't have any vegetation. So we came in the photo on the right, we installed a lot of live stakes, and granted, this was early in our program and it wasn't wide enough, so it is a pretty narrow buffer. But just look at how it looks 4 years later. Even with a really narrow 5 to 10 foot buffer, that bank is offering a lot more benefits to the river and to the wildlife than it was before, from habitat to shade for the river, to just keeping all that soil in place. This is another example from Ashe County in North Carolina. It's a little bit more steep of a bank, but still perfect eligibility for planting. So we came in, we did the same thing. It was, again, a narrow buffer, but we planted it. And just 3 years later, so this photo was taken in 2009, you can't even see the property from the river. That's how well these plants did. But sometimes you just need a contractor. So a lot of my site visits do end up with me saying, sorry, I can't help you, but, you know, I can guide you and help you go through the process of you know, hiring somebody local that can be trusted to sculpt your property and improve the bank and reduce the amount of erosion that's actually occurring. And this was one of those things that we did. So what we did here is we actually worked with a local contractor, and they came in, they sloped back the banks, they laid down a coconut fiber matting to keep all the seed down, planted with live stakes, and about 4 years later, this is what it looked like. I actually went back in about, I think it was 2015, and these were probably 10 to 12 feet high. They were well above my head. So this creek is fully restored, doing really well, with just a little bit of heavy machinery. So sometimes, you know, people ask, well, why is construction necessary? If this is a natural method of addressing stream bank erosion, why the heavy equipment? Well, sometimes streams just need help finding their equilibrium. The way I like to put it is that wild rivers out west that have just endless acres of federal lands to snake back and forth between are allowed the room to find their equilibriums. They can take down trees, they can contribute woody debris. It makes a really messy, really healthy habitat. But out here on the East Coast, we have a lot more constraints. And so streams aren't allowed to find their equilibrium before they begin threatening built infrastructure. So our houses or things like that. So sometimes it does take just a little bit of heavy machinery and a trusted engineer to come in and just help that stream find a little bit of balance. And I love this slide. So I don't have my notes in front of me, but what I like to, the way that this kind of clicked with me is this purple line. So this is a representation of a stream. It is flowing from left to right. And if you'll go with me on a journey, see this purple line, this is what's known as the thalweg. I know that's a really weird name, but it's a really important process to understand. So a thalweg is like you find the deepest parts of the stream that have the highest velocity, and you draw a line between all of those places. That's your thalweg. It's the highest velocity areas with the deepest pools, and they contribute to erosion and deposition, this thalweg, the way it flows through the stream. So if you imagine you're a car and you're driving on the road, which is this purple line, and you go really fast around this curve, you want to lean to the outside, like you're going around a, you know, one of those windy mountain roads. It's exactly what water does. So all of that energy and that high velocity just grinds into the bank on the outside of that bend. That's what contributes to erosion. So that's that shear stress, which is another term, that contributes to the erosion of that bank. But at the same time, on the opposite side of that bend, on the inside, you get what is a point bar deposition. So that's where that lower velocity, really slow moving water is. It allows all the sediment and fines to kind of settle out, and it actually builds bank back. So a lot of times on the inside of bends and streams and rivers, you'll see a little sandy area, which is exactly what we have here. This is a property we bought back in 2018. We donated it to the New River State Park. So now it is a publicly accessible beach. It is Ashe County's only beach. And it's a beach because you can see this massive bend in the river. This is a 270 acre like finger of a peninsula. And all of the fines that are on that beach are there because that thalweg just is grinding against the bank on the outside, and the velocity on the inside is slow enough that it's built this beach, which is very cool. Excuse me. So this is one of my favorite slides. It's a little animation to kind of show you how rivers move over time. This is a compilation of aerial images from 1994 to 2012. I wish I could tell you where in the world it is. I have no idea, but I love it because it is such a great tool to show how rivers want to move now that you understand what the thalweg is, what point bar deposition is, what those eroded banks, that they're always moving. Rivers are really dynamic and they're always wanting to move. But again, because we give them constraints, they're not always allowed to. Excuse me. So what I like to ask people to do is pick one bend in this animation and just watch it for a couple of cycles and watch it, the erosion on the outside, push that bend further and further, like it's moving. And then watch the point bar on the inside form and then wash away, and then form and wash away. That's what rivers want to do. And once we understand that, you know, we'd all be a lot better, but it's really cool to see it in action there. All right, so like I said, sometimes you just need a contractor to prevent that shear stress on the outside of the bend from absolutely taking all of your property with it. There are engineered structures that can be installed to prevent that high velocity water from taking your property and eroding those banks away. And they're all structures and techniques that are part of something we call natural stream channel design. It is kind of like it's engineering for rivers, but in the most natural way possible. So it's designed to emulate natural processes you find in nature. And so this photo right here, this is a structure actually built at Elk Shoals, so that beach you just saw on the previous slide. And the reason this was built is because it was something in the river had changed, and it kind of pushed the thalweg closer and closer to the beach. And it was starting to take away the beach, which is like regionally one of the favorite places that everybody goes on the weekends during the summer to go swim. And so the park was really concerned and they wanted us to do something about it. So we came in and we built one of these rock veins. And the point of these are kind of like jetties, like out in the ocean. They just keep the high energy water towards the center where it belongs. And they create these still pools like on either side, where that fines and those sediments can settle out and start to build bank back. So that's exactly what this does. But they require huge rocks, big machinery, and most importantly, permits. I'd like to throw that in. So again, here's another example of rock veins being used to stop erosion in its tracks and keep the river from over widening. So this was it before. And this was right after post-construction. You can see that one vein, it blends in. It's meant to mimic the natural environment. You can see all the live stakes planted over here in the coconut mat. And then several years later, you couldn't even tell where those structures are. There's one right here, which is the most obvious. And then there's like 3 more down here. But if you were paddling by, you'd never know, because that's what these structures are meant to do. All right, so we have been doing river builder and river restoration projects for over 20 years. And there's a few things that we've learned while we've been doing this and while we've been helping landowners do it themselves on their own banks. So we're going to walk through these really quickly. The number one reason, or the number one tip that we've learned, is that you have to treat invasive vegetation before you plant your live stakes, because plants like Japanese stiltgrass or reed canary grass are going to compete a live stake every time. So we've actually tweaked our program over the years. We treat invasives now for a couple of seasons before we go in and plant, to try to see a little bit better survival. Rock veins, like those structures we mentioned, need really, really big rocks and permits, not riprap. Riprap is a really common practice, but it's not one that those in the restoration world would recommend, because it's more of a short-term solution. It's going to fail. It's just a matter of when. So, you know, plus it's like you're just contributing more fill to the river. So when it does eventually fail, it's like you're just dumping it into the river. You're gonna have to come back and dump more on the bank. So it's better and healthier for the environment, healthier for the river, to just come in, and if you need construction, install a rock vein and then vegetate the bank. That way you're preventing the erosion from occurring, and providing this wildlife corridor and all the benefits that come along with having those vegetated banks. And again, the rocks are very big, not riprap. So this was one of probably 30 loads of boulders, I think, for the project in this photo. We restored about 3,000 feet of stream, and trucks were coming and going for about 2 weeks straight. It was pretty impressive. The third thing we've learned is that beavers absolutely love live stakes. It's like planting little candy bars for these guys. They can go in and just pluck them out of the ground and gnaw on them. So what we've learned is that we can install what we call whips. It's still a live stake, but it's harvested from higher on the plant. So it's bendy and it's malleable, and it's not useful for making a beaver dam or a little lodge. So if we can install these, they're a little less desirable. We've also learned that Ninebark, strangely enough, for whatever reason, doesn't seem as tasty to beavers as, say, Silky dogwood. So, you know, if you do have beavers or you've noticed chews, that's always a good thing to make note. Or if you've called us for consultation and to do a project, let us know, because we'll tweak our plan and we'll plant more heavily in Ninebark to try to deter those beavers. We also know that live stakes can be really risky. So there's always going to be a mortality rate. You know, survival might not always be great, but the benefit of trying live stakes and just vegetating your bank before pursuing construction is honestly the cost. It's more available to more landowners because of that, because of the cost. So to plant live stakes, it's approximately about $10 a linear foot. And if you needed construction, if you had to call in a contractor, you're looking at least $150 per linear foot. So even though the mortality rate can sometimes be pretty high and you might have to replant live stakes, you know, it's always a great first option just in terms of cost. And then the last thing we've learned is that storms are getting worse. Rain is getting more intense, it's getting more frequent. Flooding is also getting more intense and more frequent. So we just have to plan for it moving forward. This project that you see on the bottom was done early in our restoration lifetime here at New River, and we didn't plan for it. We didn't plan for flooding to get worse. And so we came in and we sloped the banks, but we didn't install any structures to really keep that high velocity water at bay. And they ended up having to come back and do a few repairs because we didn't plan for it. So now that bank is doing really well. It's fully vegetated and it's looking wonderful. But it was a great learning opportunity for us. Oh, here's our last slide. So this is the last thing we've learned is that maintenance is essential, whether we're doing it, whether a contractor's doing it, or whether you're doing it yourself. Maintenance is going to be, you know, the deciding factor between whether your plants are going to live and your buffer is going to do well or not. So if you have invasives, you need to keep treating those invasives. I think you all might know better than I do, but I think it usually takes about 5 to 7 years to actually eradicate invasive grasses. So, you know, you got to be committed. The other thing is that we plant a lot of homeowners associations and POAs. And one thing we've learned is that, thanks to Miss Nicole Hirsch, who I think is on here, buffer borders are a great psychological approach to keeping people from mowing down their buffers. If you can plant a buffer and install a fence or a railroad tie or just literally anything to kind of give your brain something to focus on to say, this is the river's area and this is my area, I can mow this. It just helps people better accept that that's going to look messy, but it's okay, and this is mine, I can manicure this. Beavers, again, maintenance is essential, and beavers come and go. And if you see beaver activity, you can try things like tree fences, beaver spray. I've also heard some landowners like to take spray bottles and fill them with vegetable oil and cayenne pepper, and they spray all of their plants. And it, you know, that's a huge thing. You'd have to go out after every rain and reapply, but I have heard that some landowners use it and it works. And then you have to harvest and replant if needed. So you can harvest your own live stakes. So if your plants get really big, You can harvest live stakes from your shrub and install them right back into the ground. So that's another thing that a lot of landowners have chosen to do. Instead of calling us to come do it, they'll just do it themselves, and it's actually pretty fun. So how to plant? If we don't come and consult with you and plant your bank through our program, you can always do this yourself, which is very cool. There is a local nursery that I work with. I'm sure there are some around Blacksburg that provide live stakes already bundled. So what you can do is you can prep them yourself. All it needs is you have to identify the top that's usually spray painted. Then you trim the bottom at a 45-degree angle, and then you lightly shave off a little bit of bark just to expose more of that cambium layer to kind of promote root growth. Another reason why you cut at an angle, besides just it's easier to drive it into the ground, is that you're exposing a lot more of that green cambium layer around the outside, which is what has all those rooting cells in it. So if you were to just cut it straight across, you get a circle, but cutting it at an angle, you get a really long oval. So it's just more surface area where the cambium meets the dirt. We like to think that it improves your chances of that stake rooting. And then to plant, you just take a rubber mallet, hammer it into the ground, make sure that at least 2/3 of the stake is underground so it's reaching the water table, and you're done. And then all that's left to do is maintain it and take photos and relish in the great work that you've done. So we like to tell people, though, live stakes are best suited closer to the water. Once you get towards the top of the bank and a little further back, you need to do potted things. And so live stakes, you can start them right at water's edge. You can even hammer them in at a completely 90-degree angle. That's totally fine. They'll still grow. And then just plant them in alternating rows about 3 feet apart. You can plant more heavily in areas where you think you might need it. It's not an exact science. And then you're done. A few ways, I've been talking forever and we'll get to the Q&A in a second, but a few ways that I wanted to let you all know you can get involved with New River Conservancy is the first and foremost, you can get involved in our River Builder program. So if you live in Giles or Montgomery counties and you have a creek in your backyard and you'd like to plant through us, it's a cost share program. So say you have 200 linear feet of bank, it's going to cost you about that much in cost share. So it might cost you $200 to $250 for us to plant it, where we just take on the rest of the cost. So it's a wonderful cost share program. So you can always call us. We'll come out, we'll do a free consultation, and then we'll get you signed up for the next planting season. Another way you can get involved is we have an upcoming event. It's called the New River Symposium. This is an event we hold every 2 years. It was delayed 1 year by COVID. But if any of you have ever joined, it's a wonderful event. Folks present their research, their art, their music, literally anything related to the New River is fair game. And we invite you to join us at the New River Gorge National Park and Preserve in April. You can register by going to our website. And then obviously we would love for you to become a member. Like you need another organization to join, but we'd love to have you. So we are a member-driven organization. We have many giving levels, so you can pick one that's right for you. We have a lot of programs, a lot of expertise. So if you have any questions and you want to get involved, you can go to our website or always email me. And I think that's it. So I'm going to stop my share, take a drink of water. And if you have any questions, I'd love to have a conversation about anything that you've heard or anything that you'd like to share.
Thanks, Chelsea. That was really interesting. I'm sure that we're going to have some questions, so we'll wait just a minute. Anybody want to address any questions to Chelsea?
Great
I'm just
presentation.
getting
Thank
around
you very
to
much.
reading the chat. It's great. I'm sorry, was somebody talking there?
I just said it was a great presentation. Thank you very much. I learned a lot from it.
Wonderful, thank you. I know that when you're presenting virtually and you don't get that back and forth, I know sometimes it's more difficult, but I really appreciate you all sitting through me talking that long. But
Chelsea, if we are out somewhere and we notice, rivers or stream beds that are eroding, what is something that, I mean, we don't know necessarily who the owner is or anything, but is there something we can do or someone we can talk to about that?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes. So you can always start with New River Conservancy. If we don't know the answer, we at least know somebody who's going to know the answer. So if you ever see something that concerns you, you can call us. In parallel, you could also call your county. So your county should have their own ordinances about what can and can't be done along the river or along a stream. So if you see something concerning, you can report it to the county or call us. And like I said, if we don't have the answer, we can always find somebody that does.
Okay, great.
I see somebody in the chat said that they are concerned about the Tom Creek Basin in Blacksburg. I say ditto. We've walked that, we've checked that out, and I'd love to do something along Tom's Creek, but those projects are the kind of projects that take years to develop and a lot of partners. So I'd love to see something done along Tom's Creek. That would be wonderful.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you guys.
Hi, Chelsea. I have a question about, I totally agree with everything you're saying. This is wonderful. But how do you reconcile the fact that for some people and some landowners, maybe what's upstream of them is not the greatest part of the watershed, and what they want? How do you reconcile the fact that all the vegetation in the riparian zone can actually slow floodwaters down versus get it off of, get it kind of moving through, which is unfortunately why you have those LA type rivers. It's because it's not really a river. It's I don't know what you would call it, a pipe, an open pipe, right? But the reason that's there is to get water away as quickly as possible from people and property. And so do you run into that a lot with the sort of restoration, because you're effectively slowing floodwaters down when you add a lot of vegetation in the increased riparian zone?
The answer, I think, is yes and no. I think I run into it a lot more often when I'm consulting with landowners on their property and they're concerned about, I get this all the time, this question, well, if we slope the river, isn't it going to make it flood more often? And I'm like, no, it's going to flood regardless. We want to make it flood without taking your bank along with it. So I do get those questions about, well, we don't want to slow it down. I don't want it in my yard. But I guess the answer to that is, if everybody did what they were supposed to do, we wouldn't have that problem. So when it comes to restoration, or even stormwater practices, we're getting more and more into stormwater green infrastructure as well. If we can slow that water down and retain it, it actually will, if we do it right, we can get it into the ground instead of it lingering. So you're slowing it down, but you're sending it somewhere else. You're just rerouting it into the groundwater and recharging those basins instead of sending it downstream where it will flood your neighbor or somebody further down. So we don't get that a lot, but that is, I think, something that some landowners are concerned about. But like I said, if we can do it right, we're not, increasing the chances of flooding. We're just rerouting it, getting it into the ground with, practices that are designed to do so. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just trying to think of, like, say a landowner was downstream of, obviously green infrastructure, sort of distributed stormwater management on site. Essentially, you want to, and I think there are increasingly rules that if you create stormwater on site, you have to maintain it on site, either through swales or bioretention basins or things along those lines. What sort of work does the Conservancy do in terms of green infrastructure in urban and suburban environments? Because that's really like, you're dealing with non-point source pollution in that case.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we're getting more and more into it. Not because we're nerds and we really like it, which is half the reason, but because everyone's being forced to, especially here in the headwaters. Even though Boone is not that large of a town, it's a very concreted town, but they're making really great efforts to mitigate all of that by installing green infrastructure with us as partners. So we are getting more and more into that to try to just, it hits on everything. If you can install a restoration practice that incorporates some sort of green infrastructure component as well, or retention of retention, you're good. Then you're not only improving the water quality and for the reasons that restoration projects do it, but you're also hitting on flood mitigation and things like that. So yeah, we are getting more and more into it, but I don't have anything to point to that shows like a long successful history, because it is, there's money out there for it now. So I hope that the next time we present to you, I can have some really great examples. But we are partnering with more and more municipalities for that type of work.
Great. Well, thanks for the good work you do.
Yeah, thank you guys. I did read a couple of questions in here. Somebody asked, do you do anything along the Little River, which feeds into the New? I know of a couple of little rivers. I'm assuming you're referring to one in the New River Valley region. And if that's the case, the answer is no, not yet. I'm not familiar with it. But if it's in our watershed, it's actually, absolutely fair game. And we'd love to check it out and help any way that we can. Then the next one said which county department, which I think was referring earlier to if you see something concerning, who do you call? I always call my local planning department, because they're the ones that know the ordinances and what you can and can't do. So a planning director or planning technician is probably a safe bet with who to start with. Then there's another question that says, is New River Conservancy strictly focused on riparian areas, or does it look at natural ponds, livestock ponds that are within a certain distance of the stream, creek, or river? That's a wonderful question, because I do get that one a lot. And my answer is we don't do a lot of that, because there are other wonderful agencies out there that are dedicated to working with farmers. So, your NRCS, your soil and water districts, they have money that is specifically designated for people who farm and have farms. So there's plenty of money out there, and we try we try to partner with them whenever we can, especially with our River Builder program, because if a farmer is going to exclude a stream or exclude livestock from their stream, it's the perfect place to plant. So if anybody has a soil and water contact, send them my way. I'd love to have a conversation. So no, we don't do a lot of work with farms and ponds and things like that. But that's because there are other agencies out there doing that kind of work. Yeah, Nicole said ours is Skyline. I've been trying to get in touch with them. I think it warrants another field day where I just go up, bring muffins, and bust into the office like, hey, I'm here and I have a program I want to partner with you on. So yeah. I know I've been talking for a really long time. So any last questions that I'd be so more than happy to discuss with you all. Otherwise, I'll let you get on with your meeting. All right, doesn't sound like it. Well, thank you all so much. I know that I blew through a ton of information. If you all have questions or think of them later, I'm happy to share my contact info with you all. You can always shoot me an email, ask me questions. And if you'd like to get involved with New River or have us out for a consultation, please reach out and we'd love to connect with you. So thank you all again so much.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Chelsea, we're going to go ahead and move on to our chapter meeting, but you're welcome to stay as long as you like. So thanks for the great presentation. I think everybody enjoyed that.
Thank you.